Welcome to Adeline Redesign. Today I'm going to be redesigning this table that I got for $5.49 into a completely different looking piece. It is a favorite of mine for pretty good reason, as I think you'll see if you stick around. It was also filthy, as you can probably guess from how much dish soap and water I've put on it and how hard I'm scrubbing. After I do this, I'll be going back with clean water and cleaning it. I can tell that it is super wobbly, but on the bottom I see that it's a basset. When I purchased this piece, I did not know it was a basset, so I was very glad to see that. I'm also a little embarrassed to say that this purchase was accidental. How wobbly it is was something that I noticed in the store. I didn't see that it was a basset, so I decided not to buy it. I decided to purchase the table next to it that was a basset, and when I came to pick it up the next day, it said brown side table. They put a brown side table in my truck. I didn't check, and then I got home and noticed that it was the wrong $5.49 side table, but I decided not to drive back, that I would just try to figure out how to deal with this one, which I thought was far inferior a choice, and I'm wrong, and I'm so happy to be wrong. Because this table didn't seem like it had a lot of potential to me to begin with, I decided I was going to go really bold with it. A single table doesn't sell as well as a pair, but a bold statement can find the right buyer sometimes. So that's what I'm going to be going with. How unstable the table was made repairing it in advance before I did anything other than clean it especially important. Every single side was coming apart, and so every single side I'm putting glue on and then doing the clamps in multiple different directions. At one point I'm using the glue as though it's caulk, which I don't actually think was all that helpful. I was getting impatient waiting for the other glue to dry, and while I don't think that using glue in the cracks the way you see me doing there was helpful for stability's sake, I do think that the way that it looked when painted was improved because those little cracks were not there. Now I could have used a paintable caulk, which I have, but I decided to try out the glue. I don't know that it helped with stability, but it did make the final look better, and so I don't regret doing that. Every side that I clamped, I had to wait for quite a while for it to dry, maybe half an hour, before I could flip it and then go to the next one. I felt really glad that I was working on multiple projects at this time because this did require so much glue up and so much waiting time. There's where I find out it's a basset, which made me so happy. I took a picture of it. I go in starting with 80 grit. This is a veneer and I know it, and I'm willing to take some risks because I don't think it's going to turn out okay, and I'm using this experimentally. It's hard for me to get the finish off, despite it being finished that didn't look like it was doing so hot to begin with. So I go in with clean strip stripper. That way I'll be less likely to tear through the veneer and end up with a situation that is even worse than what I think I'm already in. I use a foam paintbrush on here, but I do not recommend that you do that. It dissolves as you're putting the stripper on, which is kind of interesting. I did scuff sanding while I waited for the stripper to do its job, and it did a pretty good job, though the color doesn't look like it's changed much. It was very helpful, and after I clean that up and go back in with my sander, I'm going to find that it's pretty easy to get off, especially compared to the way it was. I use these pieces of metal as though they are a drop cloth. That way they don't get kicked around by the wind and come up into my work. And I use the primer that is 123. Having done a scuff sand, 123 primer followed by a paint will be perfectly adequate for coverage, and it's such a beautiful day that I want to stay outside for a while, and so I keep finding excuses to play around with the table. What looks like wobbly right now isn't actually the table being insecure, it's just the way that it's placed on that frame underneath it. Once I go in with the sander, I start to get a better feel for what this grain is going to look like. and I start to realize how wrong I was, which is a beautiful feeling when you're wrong in a way that benefits you. I'll stop talking for a minute and give you opportunity to see the wood grain revealed here. I go in with a wood stain in the color Golden Pecan, and this is when I really see how much contrast there's going to be in these 4 different squares of wood, which is really what makes the table particularly fascinating to look at. It almost has a holographic kind of effect, because if you look at it from one angle, you see 2 squares of wood that are very accentuated. From another, it's different. You see there, that was a marker that I was using because I did not do a good enough job of getting the old stain out of the troughs there on the side of the table, and it looked uneven. Using the marker to make a darker line in that trough disguised the fact that I didn't do a great job there. This is Odie's oil. It's pretty simple to use. You stir it, rub it on, buff it out. And then there's the dark teal color that I'm going to go with for the body, which is a bold choice. But as I said, I feel like a bold piece will find the right buyer often. And because this was a single piece instead of 2 matching nightstands, the chance of finding someone was going to be a little bit more challenging. It was wonderful to watch this paint color go on. I fell in love with the piece even more as it really kind of came into its own with this teal color. I found the brush and roll method to work very well for me on the body of the piece. The specific rollers that I use, I can't use for more than one coat or else the little fibers of it start coming off, but they're less than $1 each, and so sometimes it's very well worth it to me to use those rollers. In this case it was. I'm going to do a second coat of Odie's oil now on the top, and I'm only using gloves because getting the oil on my hands makes it a little difficult to get off. It's actually safe to use it without gloves, and adding a second coat brings even greater richness to the piece. I'll later off camera do a third coat, which doesn't change the look all that much, but makes me feel more comfortable with giving it heavy use. This is in my guest room next to a painting that I recently bought because sitting next to each other, I realized that they went together incredibly well, and there in the background is a crocheted blanket that also matches the painting and the side table. So I found the buyer, and it was $5.49. I didn't know I was the buyer when I got it. I didn't know it was what I was buying when I bought it, and I didn't think until I saw it next to that painting that I wouldn't want to let it go. The Odie's oil on the paint, I don't know if I'm going to want to do that again. Odie's oil is fantastic and provides a lot of protection, but on the paint it didn't blend very well, or the sheen of it was uneven throughout. Now that could be user error. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, but I probably in hindsight would have just used a water-based polyurethane or another water-based top coat. Odie's oil is pretty expensive, and so if you don't normally refinish furniture, I would not recommend you go buy some Odie's oil because a little goes a long way, and you can't buy 2 tablespoons at a time. So if you've got a friend that refinishes furniture or does woodworking and they have some Odie's oil, you might want to borrow a couple tablespoons because that's about all you're going to need for a piece. And look at the before and after. Ah. Love it if you hit like or subscribe, and check out my Buy Me a Coffee.